Thank you very much for inviting me, and also thank you very much for the earlier speakers. Really interesting, and I think we all want the same. We're saying the same thing, but in different ways, maybe. I will talk about the new normal, maybe, which is this. This is what we experienced the last years, which also is the new future for us to bear in mind when it comes to our tree population, is both in public areas, but also in private parks or in historical environment, which is a changing climate. This is some interesting satellite photos from the southwestern Sweden and eastern Denmark. And on the left, you can see the summer 2017. And on the right side, you see 2018, when we have the most remarkable drought and heat ever recorded in the Scandinavian region, 2008. And for the rest of Europe, except actually for Scandinavia, last year, 2022, was a very devastating year when it comes to heat and drought and the damages on vegetation and other infrastructure as well. This is a satellite photo from of the UK showing the mass effecting of the drought we saw last year. As Kate told you about earlier, I was in August in the east of UK, and the big oaks and the big chestnuts in the landscape just dropping the leaves in panic of this drought and the high temperatures, which is for us the new normal. And this is has created a debate how to engage this into the future. And this is just an article I found on the web in the late summer 2022, that grassy parks are maybe no longer viable in the face of global heating. And this is, I have a position also at Kew Garden together with Simon and company. And this is a picture in the beginning of June, where you can see the grasses go into yellow in panic. They are stressed already in the beginning of June. And this had shown that maybe trees are the solution in order to create shade, create resilience to future challenge, because trees are more resilient to heat and drought. They can buy themselves time, and they have a root system, they have a cell structure in the leaves and the trunk, and to handle this. But even the trees are suffering. And for us in botanic gardens and parks, we can see that some trees doesn't do well, even if they are planted in good growing environment. For example, this is a picture at Kew, where I know that Simon's going to talk about it later, but they are plant group. Even here in Gothenburg, in the Botanic Garden, we can't grow these plants anymore because they are suffering. We can't water it, we can't treat them, there's no treatment that can keep them alive or sustainable in our gardens. We have to leave them. We have to move towards an alternative plant materials. And when it comes to historical garden, this is, of course, a very uncomfortable situation where you have to realize that you have to leave some plant materials and direct to a new genetic materials. And if you look at the research showing that we are changing, for example, here's a paper that's showing that Stockholm is more resembled with Budapest in the future, London, or to Barcelona. And this is today. We are over here today, and we need to embrace it and realize the fact. But there are also a lot of uncomfortable questions when it comes to this, if we should move towards an untraditional plant materials or completely new plant materials. There's a lot of elephants in the room to consider. And one of the main elephant in the room when it comes to this, to shift from one plant material to another plant materials, is this. Is it okay to move away from native species or even native genetic materials? Still same species, but they are origin from other parts of the distribution. For example, we saw Norbert showing on beech trees not doing well. Well, maybe the East European beech is better because it's more suitable for our longer, warmer climate compared to our Western type of the same species. Is it okay because it's not native anymore? So this is a big thing we need to embrace and start to deal with right away. And we did a paper a few years ago, and I would go through it very, very fast just to show this actually a non-existing question, actually. And the paper is published a few years ago with some colleagues from Norway, New Zealand, and Germany, Ingo Kovarik from Berlin. And what we did was actually asking ourselves, is it possible to ask to say this in the same sentence? Is it possible to say sustainable urban environment and native only? Is it even possible? So we ask ourselves, is what's possible to do from a Northwestern European perspective. So, and take all the native species in the Scandinavian region and put them through 2 different filters. And in Sweden, if you're a liberal like me, I can say that I agree that some species that have been naturalized for a long, long time, they are native now. You're one of us now. So we have, for example, about 30 native tree species in Sweden or in the Scandinavian region. And we force these 30 species through 2 filters. One is which of these 30 species will not be affected by serious diseases or insect attack. And the remaining species from that filter, who will be able to develop into large and healthy trees in more stressful inner city environment, which is more, for example, heat waves like we had last year. So I thought we'd do it Swedish way. This is the wooded Swedish horse we have. If you go to Sweden, this is the stuff you come home with. Sorry about that. But these are the 30 native tree species. And the first filter is this serious diseases and pest attack. For example, when trees are growing, they're healthy, they are planted in proper environment, but still get affected by the diseases. Not like some mildew or something like that, more serious stuff. So out of these 30 species, there's only 14 left. 14 of 30 are safe from serious disease and pest attacks. A lot of these pest attacks, for example, Asian longhorn beetle, it's no question if, it's more like when will we get an outbreak. We just had an outbreak in Helsinki, Finland, of Asian longhorn beetles. They have a huge host range of trees. All right, so we take these 14 remaining species and we put them through the next filter, going through literature, reviewing studies, and see which of the remaining species have the capacity to grow in this kind of environment or tolerating summers like 2022. And the answer is 4. 4 species. And these are the one. And if we should add another filter, for example, ecosystem services or pruning or something else that they need to, the capacity to deliver, well, I'm sure that the list could become even fewer than 4. So the question is, sustainable urban environment and native tree species, is it possible? Of course not. So what we are dealing with is native only when it comes to horticulture, and from a Western, Northwestern European perspective, it's actually a non-question to deal with. So as Norbert already have been talking about, is we need to shift towards maybe other plant materials that have the capacity to tolerate the new normal, the summers that we have, for example, last year. Maybe, but the problem is when you work with a historical garden, the trees are main characters for a place. They are the one that create the soul, the what you say, the structure of a park. So it's hard to just changing to a completely different species. But what I would like to discuss is substitute species. Bear with me. Look at here. On the left side, Acer pseudoplatanus that Norbert showed that doesn't have the capacity. But if we just change it to Acer opulus, a species that are very close related to sycamore maple, that have a more eastern, warmer distribution and have a higher tolerance to heat and drought compared to sycamore maple, but still have an expression that more or less is the same as a sycamore maple. New species, same thing. Continue. Acer campestre is a drought-tolerant maple, but still, 2018, a lot of trees were damaged due to the dry summer we had 2018. But Acer monspeculanum is a species that grows in the eastern and goes all the way down through Central Asia to East Asia, and have the capacity to tolerate way warmer and drier summers compared to Acer campestre. But still, have a similar look, similar leaf, similar seasonal qualities. Different species, the same character. Carpinus speculus, the common hornbeam, beautiful tree that also have a limited capacity to deal with drought compared to Ostra carpinifolia. Many people have difficulty to see the difference between them. But you will see the difference between them in a summer like 2022. So this is a way to changing the tree population towards a more resilient species group to keep the character of the park, of the design. But then there is another elephant in the room, and that's biodiversity. A lot of this biodiversity is connected to specific species. So maybe it's not possible to just change the species and think, oh, we get the same amount of bugs, same about the birds, same about the insects, same amount of fungus and so on. Maybe it's not possible. Maybe we have to think about provenances, because Quercus robur in the green is the total distribution of the species. And Quercus robur in Sweden is not the most drought-tolerant oak trees. There are better ones. But interesting, through the distribution of Quercus robur, it developed a more drought tolerance and the more east the species goes. For example, if you go to Romania, eastern Romania, looking in the local flora, they call Quercus robur, Quercus pedunculiflora. If you go to Caucasus, Georgia, they call Quercus robur, Quercus emeritina. It's still Quercus robur, but the Romanian type is more drought tolerant, thicker leaves, a cell structure that make it more tolerant to drier summers. And if you go to the Caucasus, in the steppe forest of Caucasus, you see Quercus emeritina, still a robur, but higher potential of dealing with drought. This is the thing we have to also think about, not focus only on the species level, as Norbert said, also at the genotype and the provenance level. Same thing with Quercus petrea. When it goes to east, it changes name to Dolichampis or Iberica. Hey, it's still a petrea, but you have a more tolerant, a tree that have invest in equipment to deal with more drought. So we can still have Quercus petrea in our parks, gardens, streets, but maybe we have a Romanian type that are even higher tolerant to drought compared to the native. So this is what I mean with this big elephant in the room when it comes to not using native forever and ever. It's not all about changing species. It's also the thing to upgrade the genetic materials of the species in order to meet the new normal. So, concept for the future in tree selection, I believe anyway, is provenances. In Sweden, we talk about provenance for a long time, mainly towards winter hardiness, to tolerate coldness, to try to find the coldest distribution of the species. But maybe we also need to find the provenance of the species that are exposed to the new normal, the summers we have seen the last years. For example, this is Sorbus terminalis, the one from Bornholm, northern Denmark. It's not that drought tolerant compared to North Africa or the one from northern Iran. Another concept that we need to also embrace is ecotype. This is from a mountain in China, central China, where you have species, for example, Quercus aliena, grows on both south side of the mountains in a more drought exposed, warmer side of the mountains. You can also find the same species on the north side in a more cool, moist situation. And the genetic materials on the south side have, of course, developed a higher tolerance compared to the north side. Same provenance, with different ecotype, originating from different ecosystems. This is the stuff we need to care about, because if we have to match our tree population to a new normal, we need to care about the genetic materials of that particular species. And this is, as Philip also said, important to have the tree nursery with us, so they can support us with the trees with the right matching genetic materials. And I will end with some boring research here, so bear in mind. But this is the stuff we are doing just to telling this story. And this is evaluation of the Turgelos point, which is the investment in the leaf cell structure in order to take drought. So the lower, the more minus you have, the more negative pressure can the cell structure take without get destroyed by drought, which is more or less the more the time they can buy themselves. Because all stress biology is for the trees to buy themselves time. So the more equipment, the more investment they have in order to buy themselves time, the more drought they can take, because it's all about buying themselves time to just trying to survive the drought. And then the rain comes and like, back to normal again. But this is an interesting study we did in North America a few years ago, where we evaluate 3 different genotypes, cultivars of Ace rubrum, red maple. It's Red Sunset, October Glory, which both originate from the Appalachian Mountains, which is more cool and wet environment. And then you have the Northwood, which is cultivar originating from the Great Plain, the most western distribution of a species. So it's not rocket science to see that Northwood can take a bigger minus, which is more drought compared to the other ones, because it originates from a more drought area. So they have learned to deal with drought. They have learned that they have to invest in a cell structure that can take the pain and take the time they can buy. Other studies we did together with Liverpool Botanical Garden in Ness is that we evaluate different kind of provenance of common birch, Betula pendula, which in most of the books are sensitive to drought. Well, it depends which kind of provenance you are talking about. Because even if a drought-sensitive species like Betula pendula, there are provenance that can take rather good drought and still survive. So even in parks, historical park, the birch is an important tree. Well, maybe change it to another genetic materials and we can still have a birch-dominating park into a new normal. And this will become even clearer when you compare different collections. This is a study we did a few years ago, published 2 years ago, where we evaluate different genetic materials of different species from different tree collection. Alnarp is in Sweden, Cornell University and Morton Arboretum is in US, Kew, London, Saville and Vespelar is in Belgium. And here you can see, look at Tilia tomentosa, for example, where you can see enormous difference in the drought capacity between different genotypes or ecotypes of the same species. So you don't want to grow the Swedish one that we have in our collection in Alnarp. You want to grow the Cornell type, which is so drought tolerant compared to the other ones. And even if you go on shrubs, look at this. This is a study we are publishing very soon, hopefully. This is a species of Sparea japonica, which is a very used species in both public and private gardens. But here you can see different cultivars, the difference when it comes to drought tolerance. Little Princess, which is one of the most common ones in public plantings, is very sensitive compared to Superstar and even the Sparea japonica, which is a wild collecting ones in the Botanical Garden. So the conclusion is there is many uncomfortable things we have to deal with when it comes to historical garden and trees. We need to give up some of these ideas, as Norbert said, that working with trees is not architecture, it's not a pictures. We're working with movie, things that moves, go through different kinds of process in life. We need to embrace that and match it to a new normal. And that needs to be maybe to change different species or even work with another genetic materials. Because if our parks and garden should become this important recreational habitat for the people? Well, the trees are important, and that way need to work with the right trees. So thank you very much, and looking forward to some questions. Thank you.